Hello, my dears. What a pleasure to share with you on this dismal, rainy day the world of Shandy Hall, which is forever in daylight in our minds. And all the more so when poor Walter Shandy, having returned from a failed visit to York to try and engineer the renaming of his new son, is amazed to be distracted from his grief by the legacy of £1,000 from his sister Dinah. £1,000. I mean, an immense sum of money. £10 you could live on in a year in those days. Not very comfortably, but you could live on it. So is £1,000 maybe, certainly 100,000, maybe more than that, maybe 1 million, maybe 500,000. A lot of money anyway. And so it instantly began to plague and puzzle poor Walter's head how to lay it out, mostly to the honour of his family. 150-odd projects took possession of his brains. By turns he would do this, that, and the other thing. He would go to Rome. He would go to law, meaning he would sue somebody. He would buy stock. That's livestock rather than stocks and bonds. He would buy John Hobson's farm. He would new forefront his house and add a new wing to make it even, symmetrical. There was a fine water mill on this side, and he would build a windmill on the other side of the river in full view to answer it, to balance it. But above all things in the world, he would enclose the great ox moor and send out my brother Bobby immediately upon his travels. But as the sum was finite, even £1,000 wasn't infinite, and consequently could not do everything, and in truth very few of these to any purpose. Of all the projects which offered themselves upon this occasion, the last two seemed to make the deepest impression, and he would infallibly have determined upon both at once, but for the small inconvenience hinted at above, which absolutely put him under a necessity of deciding in favour either of the one or the other. This was not altogether so easy to be done, for though it is certain my father had long before set his heart upon this necessary part of my brother's education. It's a very important part of a young man's education, to go around Europe, seeing the great sights, and probably coming back from Rome with what was called in those days a synoptic view of Rome, which very falsely gave the visual impression that all the beautiful buildings in Rome were right next to each other. This was a contrivance very popular in that century and still commonly found today, where families have kept their old keepsakes from their relatives who went on what was called the Grand Tour. And like a prudent man, this is Walter, had actually determined to carry it into execution with the first money that returned from the second creation of actions in the Mississippi scheme. Oh, God, not the Mississippi scheme. One of the many schemes, like the groundnut scheme. People were going to make a fortune out of peanuts. They never did, in which he was an adventurer. He had ventured money. Yet the Oxmoor, which was a fine, large whinny, that's to say it had lots of whin, the plant, a thorny plant that was that infuriated people and animals. Nobody wanted to go near a whin bush. Undrained, unimproved common land, as it was called. It's a common, belonging to the Shandy estate, had almost as old a claim upon him. He had long and affectionately set his heart upon turning it likewise to some account. Likewise meaning turning poor Bobby to some account as well. But having never hitherto been pressed with such a conjunction of things, actually having to choose between two, like a wise man, he'd refrained from entering into any nice or critical examination about them. So these two old projects, the Oxmoor and my brother, divided him again, and so equal a match were they for each other as to become the occasion of no small contest in the old gentleman's mind, which of the two should be set a-going first. Now, people may laugh as they will, but the case was this. It had ever been the custom of the family, by length of time, it had almost become a matter of common right, that the eldest son of it should have free ingress, egress, and regress into foreign parts before marriage, not only for the sake of bettering his own private parts, so to speak, but by the benefit of exercise and change of so much air, but simply for the mere delectation of his fancy, by the feather put into his cap of having been abroad. Tantum valet, my father would say, quantum sonat. It's worth every bit of how good it sounds. People may laugh, but it was true for the Shandys. Now, as this was a reasonable and in course a most Christian indulgence to deprive him of it, without why or wherefore, and thereby to make an example of him as the first Shandy unwhirled around Europe in a post-chaise. Well, post-chaise is carried by people, or maybe it's carried by horses, but certainly carried about, whirled about Europe, and only because he was a heavy lad. It was not but unfortunate for whoever had to carry him, would be using him 10 times worse than a Turk. The Turks, who traditionally, as in the time of Othello, were to be mistreated because they were not properly civilized people. They were savages, they were Turks. On the other hand, the case of the Oxmoor was full as hard. Exclusive of the original purchase money, and now we discover that it originally cost £800, almost £1,000, and it cost 800 more thanks to a lawsuit over the land, so it had already cost £1,600. And it had been in possession of the Shandy family ever since the middle of the last century, and though it lay full in view before the house, it was that great stretch of land you saw as you approached the great house, bounded on one extremity by the watermill, and on the other by the projected windmill spoken of above, and for all these reasons seemed to have the fairest title of any part of the estate to the care and protection of the family, yet, by an unaccountable fatality common to men as well as the ground they tread on, it had all along most shamefully been overlooked, and to speak the truth of it, had suffered so much by it that it would have made any man's heart bleed. That's what Obadiah said, because he had to exercise the horse on it, who understood the value of land, to have rode over it and only seen the condition it was in. However, as neither the purchasing this tract of ground, nor indeed the placing of it where it lay, were either of them properly speaking of my father's doing, he had never thought himself in any way connected to the affair till the 15 years before, when the breaking out of that cursed lawsuit, and then now that was Walter's deed. So now he saw that in honour bound he really ought to justify the cost and the time and the pain of the lawsuit by doing something about it, and that now or never was the time. I think there must have been a mixture of ill luck in it, and the reasons on both sides should happen to be so equally balanced by each other, for though my father weighed them in all humours, different moods and conditions, spent many an anxious hour in the most profound and abstracted meditation upon what was best to be done, reading books of farming one day, books of travels another, laying aside all passion whatever, viewing the arguments on both sides, with all their lights and circumstances, communing every day with my Uncle Toby, arguing with Yorick, talking over the whole affair of the Oxmoor with Obadiah, yet nothing in all that time appeared so strongly in behalf of the one, which was not strictly applicable to the other, or at least so far counterbalanced by some consideration of equal weight, so as to keep the scales down. And hidden behind this description is a fact that soon emerges, which is that Bobby is an Oxmoor of a man. He's a mess. He's full of whinbush thorns. He's undrained and incomplete. So the problem is, which of these two neglected aspects of the Shandy world, the field, the Oxmoor, which, by the way, of course, is just the moor, the pasture, the harrowed wild pasture where the oxen graze, just as Oxford, the famous university, is where the oxen forded the river. There was a ford there, which is where what you need to get across a river. It's called a ford. And so there they are, the two of them, human Oxmoor and landscape Oxmoor, vying for Walter's attention and Walter's money. Yes, now he admits it, for to be sure, with proper helps and in the hands of some people, though the Oxmoor would undoubtedly have made a different appearance in the world from what it did, or ever would do, in the condition it lay, yet every tittle of this was true with regard to my brother Bobby. Let Obadiah say what he would. So, alas, he's admitting that his brother Bobby was as much of an eyesore as the Oxmoor, and as much in need of having money spent on him. So, in point of interest, the contest I own at first sight did not appear to be so undecisive betwixt them, for whenever my father took pen and ink in hand and set about calculating the simple expense of paring and burning and fencing in the Oxmoor, etc., with the certain profit it would bring him in return, the latter turned out so prodigiously in his way of working the account that you would have sworn the Oxmoor would carry all before it. For it was plain he should reap 100 lasts of rapeseed. You see rape still all over the eastern counties of England. It's a wonderful bright golden plant, at £20 a last, the very first year, besides an excellent crop of wheat the year following, and through the rotations of the crops he would make a tremendous amount of money. But then, to think he was all this while he was cultivating the Oxmoor, breeding up my brother like a hog, to eat them, the plants that he grew, knocked all on the head again, because what was the point in growing all these wonderful rich plants to feed fat brother Bobby with, if fat brother Bobby was a disgrace to the Shandy family even more than the Oxmoor, and generally left the old gentleman in such a state of suspense that, as he often declared to my brother Toby, to my uncle Toby, he knew no more than his heels what to do. His heels knew it just as well as he did. Nobody but he who has felt it can conceive what a plaguing thing it is to have a mind's man torn asunder by two projects of equal strength, both obstinately pulling in a contrary direction at the same time. For to say nothing of the havoc which by a certain consequence is unavoidably made by it all over the finer systems of the nerves, which you know convey the animal spirits and more subtle juices from the heart to the head, and so on, it's not to be told in what a degree such a wayward kind of friction works upon the more gross and solid parts, wasting the fat and impairing the strength of a man every time as it goes backwards and forwards. My father had certainly sunk under this evil, as certainly as he had done under that of my Christian name, had he not been rescued out of it, as he was out of that, by a fresh evil, the misfortune of my brother Bobby's death. So, I'm afraid poor Bobby's reduced to being this overfed, uneducated, unpolished solution by his death to an agonizing choice on the part of his father, whether to educate the land or educate the boy. And what a relief, no longer to have a boy even to educate. And it allows Tristram to launch himself into grieving passages like politicians here in America when people are yet again massacred by some lunatic, and they babble about where their thoughts and prayers are. Well, similarly, Tristram exclaims, "What is the life of man? Is it not to shift from side to side, from sorrow to sorrow, to button up one cause of vexation and unbutton another?" So the life of man, in our narrator's final conclusion, is simply, as a fortune teller once told me, it left a great mark on my mind because I put her as a character into one of my early long novels, possibly the most successful of my novels. She said to me once, in a manner that was to convey deep meaning, she said, "One door shuts, another opens." It left me feeling hopeful. I hoped that would be the nature of my life, but it was clearly part of the lore of fortune-telling as she had acquired it. She had many similar sooths, which you could find if you happened upon my novel Richard's Feet, F-E-E-T. Richard becomes a devotee of this wonderful lady.